Hello everybody, good morning and welcome to today's webinar covering part 1 of Payroll Year End, which is all about the installation and preparation for Payroll Year End. My name's Alice, I'm here with my colleague Duncan as well, and we'll both be delivering today's webinar and showing some demonstrations throughout as well. Now Duncan will be back in a little while, but let's go over what we're going to cover in today's session. So we'll start with an introduction, so a couple of Payroll Year End key dates and deadlines to be aware of. Duncan will then come back to go over installing your year-end update with some top tips for a smooth installation as well. I'll come back to help you prepare for year-end and show you what that involves. And we should have some time as well. At the end, we'll have some further support and, of course, answering some more of your questions as well. So we'll move on to that introduction. A couple of key dates for you, starting with the 4th of March, which is when our Payroll Year-End Update was released. So this is version 30 of Sage 50 Payroll, and it's now mandatory. So if you haven't already updated, you will be prompted to install that when you open the payroll before you can access your companies. And speaking of updates, we had the spring budget announcements, of course, on the 6th of March. And as a result of the NI legislation changes that were announced on Tuesday this week, so the 12th of March, we also rolled out a legislation update to cover those changes. Now, Duncan will be going over this in more detail very shortly, including how to update that legislation in your payroll. So be sure to stick around for that, just so you know exactly what you need to do to be prepared for the new tax year. March 12th is also the day that version 30 became mandatory. So as I mentioned, if you haven't updated that yet, you will be prompted when you next open the programme. The next key date is the 5th of April. So this is the last day of the tax year. And by that date, you should have completed your payroll for your last pay date and have submitted the FPS as well. The day after, we've got the 6th of April as well, so any pay date on or after this date will fall into the new tax year, which of course is the 2024-2025 tax year. We've then got a few deadlines to be aware of. So we've got the 19th of April, which is the deadline for the final submission of the tax year. So this will be done during the actual steps of processing year end. Now, we don't go quite that far in today's webinar, but we do cover this and the whole process of your payroll year end in our part 2 webinar. We've also got the 31st of May, and this is the deadline for your employees to receive their P60s. So this is for any employees who are still employed with you at the end of the tax year. Anyone who left prior to the 5th of April, they won't get a P60, instead they'll get a P45. So they're the key dates and deadlines you need to know, but I would just like to show you what we've got in store for both of the webinars. So today, in part 1, we'll be covering installing and preparing for year end. So that's kind of any tasks leading up to your last pay date in the current tax year. Then in part 2, which we're running this afternoon, we will be covering processing year end step by step, including that final submission and of course producing your P60s as well for your employees. So that was a few key dates and deadlines for you. We are going to bring Duncan back now to cover installing year-end update and of course the legislation update too.
Thank you very much, Alice. So I'm going to be taking care of the install part of install and prepare, and we're going to talk about installing your year-end update. Now, I appreciate that it is now a mandatory update and many of you will have already installed version 30, which is great news, but I'm going to share some tips around preparing to install to ensure a smooth installation, which you can keep in mind for the next time an update is released. So we're going to go over a checklist briefly, but then we're going to talk about the legislation update that you will need to apply once you've got version 30 up and running. So starting off with preparing to install, there are 4 items of best practice that we recommend you complete before you install an update. Now, I know you will not be able to do some of these now if the update is mandatory, but as I say, it's something to keep in mind for next time there's an update. So the first step is to optimize your data. So this runs some maintenance on the database and make sure that your data is error-free and it prevents any kind of issues that may occur when data is upgraded. Second step is to check your program directory. So this tells you where your program is installed and it enables you to check that you're installing the update in that same location. Step 3 is to check that automatic updates are switched on. So I'll show you where to find those settings. And step 4 is to make sure you have an up-to-date backup of your payroll data. So I am going to demonstrate these steps. So let's just bring the slides down and we'll go full screen for you. Now the optimize option can be found at the point you log into your company. So when you first open up Payroll, you'll see an open company screen with one or more payrolls. And before you log in, you can select the company you want to go into and you can click this optimize option to optimize your data. Now it doesn't take long and you'll see messages that appear on the screen. And once it's complete, it'll confirm that your data has been optimized. And from that point, you can log in as normal. So if you have multi-company, you can select other companies in your list and repeat these steps. But you won't be able to optimize any payroll that has a user logged in. So if you're logged into a payroll or any of your colleagues are, they would need to log out before you can run that optimize option. And then it is just a case of logging into your payroll as normal. And from that point, your data has then been optimized. Now, second thing I want to show you is how to check your program directory. And I'll show you a couple of ways of doing this because I appreciate some of you won't be able to get into the program until you've installed the update. So if you can log into a payroll, you can click onto Help and then About. And when the support information loads up, just check the Program Details section. And under here, you'll find your program directory. So this is where Payroll is installed on your PC. And in this example, I've installed my program into the default folder, which is C:/program files x86/Sage Payroll. So we'd recommend you keep a note of your program directory. And if you can't get into this page, for example, because you're being prompted to install the update, you can also check where your program's installed by right-clicking your payroll shortcut and then clicking Properties and then checking what it says in the target. So the target will end with payroll.exe and the path before that is your program directory. So in my case, it's C:/program files x86/Sage Payroll. So once you've got a note of that, you'll be able to check that you're installing the update into the right location. Next thing I want to show you is how to check that automatic updates are switched on. So within your payroll, go to Tools, and then come down to Internet Options. And then on the Software Updates tab, you'll see some options to choose from. So I've selected the recommended option. Check and download Sage software updates and automatically install them when I exit. And there is also a manual option which lets you check for the updates by clicking Help and Check for Updates. But what I would say is that once an update goes mandatory, these settings are overridden. So you will get the prompt to install the update before you can actually log in to your payroll. But this is some configuration you can do while an update is optional. And the last step in preparing to install is to back up your payroll data. Now you should be doing this as part of your usual payroll routines, but it's particularly important before installing an update, as if there is a problem with upgrading the data, you'd have a backup you could restore back to if you needed. So to take a backup, you can simply go to the File menu in the top left and then click Backup, which takes you into the backup wizard. You would click onto Next, and we'd recommend that you back up the files that are automatically selected. So these files here in blue. Click Next again, and then what you can do is you can browse to a suitable location. So you might consider backing up to an external drive or to cloud storage. And I'd recommend that you rename the backup file so you know exactly when it was taken. So I'm going to call this pre-install PYE update. And then to complete the backup, backup, I would click Next and then Finish. So you can see there the backup has been successful and I have completed the steps to prepare to install. So just as a quick recap, to prepare to install, we recommend that you optimize your data, you check your program directory and make a note of it, check that automatic updates are switched on, and back up your payroll data. Now, this is best practice. I appreciate you may not have had the chance to do that in advance of version 30, but something to keep in mind for the next update that is released. So next we'll talk about the installation process. So you will need to download the update and then install it. And you would either download using the automatic updates prompt in your program, where you'll be prompted to download and then install. Or if for some reason automatic updates aren't working, and sometimes it can be blocked by things like firewalls or antivirus, you can download the installer manually from our help center. So I just want to quickly show you where to get the download if you're doing it manually. So if you go to our year-end support hub, which is sage.co.uk/PYE, you'll end up on this page here. You would just need to click Sage 50 Payroll. And then from our Payroll Year-End Hub, if you click onto Step 1, Download and Install Year-End Update, that'll take you to our support guide. Tells you everything you need to know about installing. And you'll see there's a link here to get the download. So that will download the installation file. You can then close all of your save programs and you can run that file to begin the installation. So that's downloading the update. Once it's downloaded, you need to run that file to install it. The installation routine is exactly the same as it has been for recent versions. So you will need to accept a license to continue with the install, and then the installer will detect the folder that it's looking to upgrade. So this is where you should check that the correct path has been detected, comparing that with your program directory. And in my case, C program files x86/Sage Payroll is the correct location. So I would click yes to upgrade that path. If it isn't, if it's detected the wrong path, you can click no, and then you can browse to the program directory that you noted earlier. All of the required files are then copied. Takes a few minutes, and when the installation is complete, you'll see the confirmation message on the current slide. So we recommend that you save any work and restart your computer. So you can click OK to that message. It won't restart automatically. So if you want to do that, you'll need to restart your PC yourself, but then you're ready to log in to your updated Sage Payroll software. So once that installation's complete, what you'll need to do is to open Payroll in the usual way. And then the first time you access each company, it will both upgrade and optimize your data. So this converts your payroll data to version 30, and that only needs to be done once for each company. We also recommend that you check your version number has updated to version 30, and there's a new feature that will give you a big clue that you've installed the update. There is a new home screen in Sage Payroll, so if you're seeing that, you can be fairly confident that the upgrade has gone on correctly. And when you've done that, it'll be time to update your national insurance legislation. So this is in response to the spring budget announcement on the 6th of March, where the national insurance rate for employee has been reduced from 10% to 8%, taking effect on the 6th of April. So there was only a month for software developers to implement that change. And this is why we are using the legislation update service rather than a full installation for a full program for you to make these changes. So it's a really simple process. To apply the changes, once you've upgraded your data, you need to log into a payroll and click Tools and then check for legislation updates. You'll then be prompted to check for updates to current legislation. So you'd go ahead and click Yes. And then the NI bans and rates legislation will be found, and you would click Yes to apply those changes. So those changes will be made for the payroll that you're logged into, and also if you have multi-company, any other payrolls where you use the same username and password. And it'll show you a log file just explaining which of the companies have been updated. Now, I want to give you a demo of this process because it's really important that you do this before you start payroll in the new tax year. So if I just bring the slides down, and we're going to go into full screen mode again. So I've installed version 30. If I want to check my version number, I can click Help and then About. And from the support page, under Program Details, you can see that my version number now starts with 30.00. And I also have this home page, which will be set as the initial view when you first log into Payroll. But I will show you how you can change that if you want to. Now, to install the legislation update, simply go to Tools and click Check for Legislation Updates. Click Yes to the prompt, and then it will detect the NI bans and rates legislation. So would you like to apply the changes now? You can go ahead and click Yes, because these changes will take effect once your process date is on or after the 6th of April. So I can go ahead and click Yes, and then this log file has appeared, telling me which companies have been updated. So I can see that company 1 has been successfully updated, as has company 2, because I do log in with the same username and password to that company. But for company 3 in my list, because I use a different password for that company, the legislation has not been updated. So what I would need to do is to log into that company separately and then run the exact same steps. So if you are running a multi-company payroll, I'd strongly recommend that you print this log file the first time you apply the legislation changes, and then you can work through any of the companies that were not updated, and you can update those individually. So I'm going to close the log file, and then I'm told there are no further legislation updates found. So the program is currently up to date. The legislation is date sensitive. So at the moment, my process date is set to today's date. So if I want to check the NI change has been made, first thing I need to do is to set the process date to the 6th of April or later. I can then go to Company and Legislation, and I can click the NI tab. So as you can see, the employee rate for category A is now showing 8% on earnings between primary threshold and upper earnings limit, and that will be the correct rate from the 6th of April 2024. But any payrolls I need to finish off in the current tax year will still use the current legislation. For national insurance, that was effective from the 6th of January. Now, while we're in the demo, I just want to show you a couple of changes that have been made in version 30. So first of all, we've introduced the new home page, or the home screen, which is the initial view when you log into your payroll. So this brings you useful information. It's online content, so it's dynamic. We can update this with relevant information. For example, our guide on checking for legislation updates. So you can easily access that from here, as well as our free webinars. But if for some reason you don't want this to be your initial view, maybe you want to see your payroll tasks when you first log in, you can configure this. So I've already set this up, but I'll show you how I did it. You go to the View menu at the top of the screen, and you come down to Options. And then if you click the Environment tab, from here you can set an initial view. So it will be set to Home once you've installed version 30. But if you don't want to land on the home page, you can always set it to something else, for example, Payroll. And then that way, you'll see your payroll tasks when you log in, and you can easily switch to the home view by clicking onto Home. The other thing that has changed, and this will affect you if you use our process maps, is that the Change View option to switch between the employee list and process map has now moved. So it used to be located in the top right corner. So on the payroll tasks, you could change view and you could switch on your payroll process map. But what you now need to do is go to the view menu, come down to change view, and then click onto process map. So that switches it on. You can resize it as usual. If you want it switched off, go back to view, change view, and switch back to the employee list view. So that's where that option has moved to. And those are just a couple of changes in version 30 that I wanted to point out. So we've seen there how to apply the legislation update. Super important you do this as soon as possible. So go to Tools, check for legislation updates and apply those changes. And if you are multi-company, try to do this logged in as a user that has access to other companies as well. And make sure you print the log file so you know which of your companies were updated and which you'll need to log into separately. One final note for those of you on a multi-user system, so you've got multiple installations of Payroll connected to one set of shared data, you will need to install version 30 on each PC that you use Payroll from. Now, if you forget to do this and you try to access data that has been upgraded to version 30, you'll see the error message on the current slide. It's really simple to resolve. All you need to do is to close out of those messages, download version 30 and get it installed on the PC that you're running on. So the legislation update is done per company. So once that's done, that will be updated for all users. But version 30 needs to be installed on every individual PC. So that's about it for installing the year-end update. So it is now time to bring Alice back, who's now going to take over and run us through preparing for year-end. So back to you, Alice.
Thanks, Duncan. Yeah, so now that we're back in our company, then we can start to prepare for our year end. The majority of these steps fall into your last pay run of the tax year. So we've put together a little checklist just to make sure that you're all prepared and know exactly what you need to do. So first thing is checking if you've got a week 53. That'll show you how to work out if you've got one and what you need to know if you do. Step 2 will then be a case of processing and updating that final pay period of the current tax year, which also includes processing any leavers and of course submitting your FPS and, if necessary, an EPS as well. And then step 5 will be to back up your data. Now please know that those submissions are not your final year-end submissions. That does come as a separate step when you actually process your year-end, which again we do cover in part 2. So if you want to see how that's done, we do have a session tomorrow afternoon and more dates as well in the month coming up. So I'm going to give you a bit more information on each of these steps and a demonstration of them too, starting with week 53. Which we do think is going to be more common this year. So even if you don't normally have a week 53, I would definitely advise that you double check. So this year is a leap year, meaning there's 366 days in the year, which actually results in there being 2 days that week 53 could fall on. So that's Thursday the 4th of April and Friday the 5th. So if you run a weekly, fortnightly or 4-weekly payroll, this is when you'd need to check if you've got a week 53. If you're monthly, you won't have one. A nice easy way to see if you've got one is checking our tax calendars actually. So I've got the Payroll Year-End Hub here. So this is just sage.co.uk/PYE. I've selected Sage 50 Payroll. And if I go to the week 53 section, there is a lot more information on week 53 itself. But a nice quick way to see if you've got one is to go to the 23-24 tax calendar. So there's a link to that there. And you'll see the tax months 1 to 12 displayed here, with of course the tax weeks on the left of each table as well. Now if we scroll down to month 12, we can see there's actually 2 extra days which fall into week 53, and that's Thursday the 4th and Friday the 5th of April. So if your regular payday falls on a Thursday or Friday, and if you're weekly, fortnightly or 4-weekly, I would definitely advise you to check here because you likely will have a week 53. An easy way to know if you have not got one though is if you're monthly or if your regular payday is not a Thursday or Friday. So in that case, you won't have a week 53. Now, if you've checked and you do have one, there's nothing different that you need to do. You just change your process date to your pay date, so 4th or 5th of April, and process as normal. The payroll's going to automatically apply the week 1 calculation to the tax for any relevant employees, so there's no need to change tax codes or do anything differently. You just process this pay run as normal. So that's step 1 of the checklist, checking for week 53. We'll go full screen now, and we'll just go to the payroll and we'll move on to step 2, which is going to be to process and update that final pay period. So I'll just go to the payroll section, and we can see that I run a monthly payroll, so we can just see the pay period here. And my last pay day is the last day of each month. So for month 12, my pay date is going to be the 31st of March, and this is also the last pay run that I need to run before I can process year end. So from my payroll tasks, I'm just going to click on change process date and double check that this is set to the 31st of March, which it is. And you can see quick confirmation of your process date just in the bottom right of the screen. Now, there's not much to do differently at all for your final pay run, to be honest, but definitely a few things to bear in mind, especially if you've got any pro rata directors on your payroll. If you do, their final pay period will have an automatic recalculation of their national insurance, so you will likely see some changes to national insurance on any pro rata directors that you've got. So my employee number 1, they are a director, so I'm just going to open up the record and we'll check what their status is by going to employment and director status here, and we can see they are set to pro rata. This also used to be called the table method, but it basically means that the national insurance is being calculated as if they were a normal employee for the year so far. But for their final pay, it'll be recalculated using instead the annual method, which is actually the other status that you can have a director as. So the annual method doesn't have that recalculation. This is only for pro rata directors, which I will explain a little bit more about later on. So for now, I'll just save the record. We'll come out of that. And I'm just going to go ahead and start processing my last pay run. So obviously my process date's set now. So I'm going to go to enter payments from the payroll tasks. And this message is just coming up because I've got a leaver highlighted and also somebody who's on hold. So I'm going to deselect them. And here comes enter payments. So from a director, there's not going to be any change to their pay, so I'm just going to go ahead and click on Save Next. And we can see this message come up to say that the director's been recalculated on a year-to-date basis. So this is that recalculation that I was talking about. The payroll does do that automatically, so you don't need to worry too much about the figures or anything. But just know that the national insurance will likely be different to what they normally pay, and I've got an example of that coming up as well. So we'll click OK. I'm just going to save everybody else's pay. And for employee number 5 as well, this employee is actually on statutory paternity pay. So we can see a full 2 weeks of that calculating. And because I'm reclaiming that statutory payment, I will also be sending an EPS a little bit later in the pay run. So let me just save everyone else. There's no difference to anyone else's pay. And this is when you would normally move on to your next steps, so your pension assessment, your pre-update reports, uploading the pay slips and things as well. But for today's webinar, I'm just going to skip ahead to update the records. So I'll click on this from my payroll tasks. Little reminder of the pre-update reports there as well. And you are prompted to take a backup at this point as well, which I would highly recommend to do. And Duncan gave a really good tip before of making sure you name it something memorable. So I'll click next in here and just browse to this, and I'm going to call it pre-update backup month 12. Just so I know exactly where I was in the pay run as I took this backup. And then click next and finish. And now that that backup's been done, we can skip through and click next on the update records wizard. We'll see a list of the employees who are going to be updated, and I'll click finish. And we can now see that my last updated date for the relevant employees is set to my last pay date now, which is the 31st of March. So that is all the way up to update records. So we'll just go back to the slides. I do want to talk about directors again, as I know I loosely mentioned that recalculation before. So the way a director's national insurance is calculated does depend on their status. So that's either annual or pro rata. But no matter what status they are, by the end of the tax year, all of the directors must have paid the correct national insurance contributions. And that's based on their cumulative earnings and the annual rate for directors and I as well. If they're an annual director, that's calculated throughout the year, and they don't pay national insurance until their cumulative earnings reaches the primary threshold, which is £12,570. But if they're pro rata, like my director, their national insurance has been calculated using the weekly or monthly thresholds throughout the year, as if they were a non-director or a normal employee. So that's why a recalculation is needed in the last pay period, which now uses those annual thresholds instead. Now, as you're aware, especially after the spring budget announcements, legislation does change from time to time, which includes national insurance thresholds and figures. So because of this, the director's national insurance calculation for the current tax year, so the 23-24 tax year, will use a blended rate. So for employees, from the primary threshold to the upper earnings limit, that's 11.5%, and for employers, that's 13.8%. Now, if you do want to know any more about the national insurance for directors, we have linked a really good article in the handout just here on the slide, or alternatively, you can search Directors NI on the Help Centre as well. I would like to show you though a little bit of what that recalculation has done for my director and why it's done it too. So I've got a screenshot of the Payment Summary History Part 1. So just where I've highlighted there, we can see the gross pay and the monthly earnings for my director, which is a mostly regular amount each period of £2,750. Apart from in December, where they got a Christmas bonus. So there is a bit of a pay spike there, going up to £10,250. So in the same month, in December, their national insurance contributions did go up as expected. But because those monthly earnings were above the upper earnings limit, anything above that limit was actually only 2% national insurance contributions. So now if we look at the year as a whole, we can see the gross pay just at the bottom at £40,500, which is actually less than the annual upper earnings limit. So if we go back to the national insurance, that's why month 12's contributions look so different, because the payroll's done a recalculation in the last month there, in the last pay period, to kind of correctly work out that national insurance. So what's actually happened is they've paid the national insurance in the last pay period that they should have paid with their bonus back in December. That's a little bit more of an explanation of why it's done that recalculation. So we'll just go full screen again. We'll go back to the demonstration. And that's step 2 of the checklist complete as well. So we've processed that final pay run and updated the records. But I do just want to move on to step 3 now, which is processing leavers. So as we can see, I've already got a leaver on my payroll, employee number 3. We can see their status is set to leaver. You may, however, have an employee that you haven't made a leaver just yet, or you simply just have people who've left in your last pay period. Now, I don't have anybody else leaving, but if I did, I would just highlight them and go to employee in the bottom left. And from the tasks in here, you can see leaver. So this comes up with the leaver wizard. You just need to click next on this. And it's just going to be a case of popping in their leaving date and selecting their stationery as well. So the P45, you can preview this, print it out from here, and then just click finish. But because I'm not actually making them a leaver, I'm just going to cancel out of this and go back to this screen. So as well, for anyone who is made a leaver, their leaver information will be sent across to HMRC when you do the FPS. You may also notice I've got an employee on hold. And now they're still employed, but they only work seasonally. So they work through student holidays and things. And they aren't actually returning to work for me until after April. So they won't need to be taken off hold unless they were returning to work and getting more pay. If they weren't returning at all, this is when you would make them a leaver. But because this employee has been paid at some point in the tax year, and because they're still employed, they will also still get a P60 as part of the year-end process. So I can leave them on hold as I process payroll year-end, and they will get a P60, as I said, providing they've still been paid in the tax year. So that's leavers processed, and that's step 3 done as well. And we can now move on to submitting the e-submissions, so the full payment submission and also the employer payment summary, since I'm reclaiming some paternity pay. And just a reminder as well, these submissions are not your final year-end submissions. There is a separate submission to do during your year-end process. So these ones are just your normal ones that you would do after a pay run. So let's go back to the payroll section. Just going to highlight everybody and click on full payment submission. You can ignore this window as well. It's just because I'm in a training environment. So I'm just going to click continue. And this is the normal screen that you would see. So I'll click continue, got the gateway registration and the company details. So I'll click submit and a little indicator just to double check whether it's your final submission is just this box here. So we can see that it's not the final submission. So we're okay to submit this and we'll click submit. Now, some of the software providers might do these submissions a little bit differently. So if you've been with someone else in the past, for example, but yeah, we do have this as a separate step, just to remind you there. And we can also now see my last FPS date is now matching my last updated date. So I'll also move on to the EPS, since I'm reclaiming some statutory payments, and I can submit that by going to e-submissions in the bottom left, and then clicking in employer payment summary, which is just in the task section. And because I'm reclaiming or recovering statutory payments, I'll select the first option and click next. Got the tax month selected as default, click next again. And here we can see a nice kind of summary of the year-to-dates of the statutory payments. So we can see the 2 weeks of paternity pay for employee number 5, which I showed you before. And I also did have another employee on maternity pay a little bit earlier in the tax year, so we can see that figure there too. So I'll click next. Of course, you can check all these figures, but just work through the wizard and click on finish. And again, just ignore this window. This is the one that you'll see when you submit it. Click continue. And again, just a little indicator there to show that it's not the final submission. So I'll click submit. And again, that's been successful. So as easy as that, the submissions are now done as well. And that's also step 4 complete. So the last step to prepare for year end is to take a backup of our payroll data. So I know we've just taken one before we updated the records, but now that we've done those submissions as well, it's definitely a good idea to get one with the payroll done and dusted. So for this, I'll go to File and Backup. Click Next. I'm going to back up the default files, so I'll leave those. And this time I'm going to call it month 12 complete. Click Next and Finish. And that's step 5 done and dusted now as well. So let's go back to the slides and have a little bit of a recap of what we just did. So we submitted that FPS and EPS. And again, just a reminder to have a little look at that indicator to show that it's not the final submission of the year. But yeah, so we first of all checked if we had week 53. So if you are monthly or if your regular pay date does not fall on a Thursday or Friday, then you're safe and you won't have a week 53. But anyone else, I would advise that you check. Of course, take a look at the tax calendar as well from our Payroll Year-End Hub. We then processed and updated that final pay period of the current tax year, which included processing any leavers, submitting the FPS and EPS since I was reclaiming statutory payments, and finished off there just with a backup of our data. So that's how to prepare for year end. But there is one last thing for you to consider, as it is also time to think about how you're going to be doing your P60s this year. Now, you might do these the same as your payslips. So, for example, if you do online payslips, you can also upload online P60s to Sage HR. Or if you're an accountant, that's going to be the online bureau portal. Or you might want to email the P60s or print them out. Lots of options there on Sage 50 Payroll. But just remember, P60s are only for employees who are still employed at the end of the tax year. So that means any leavers throughout the tax year, or anyone who's left kind of in the last pay run that you've done, they won't need a P60. Instead, they'll get a P45. So that's most of the content that we're covering kind of out the way, but I do want to bring back Duncan for a little bit more before we move on to further support as well. So it's over to you, Duncan.
Thanks for that, Alice. So on the subject of P60s, we're just going to finish off this section of the webinar with a quick poll for you to join in and to vote on the options on screen. So just trying to get a bit of insight from you to understand how you are currently planning to do your P60s this year. So I will launch the poll now on screen. And if you want to join in, just select the relevant response or responses. And if you can submit them through, we'll have a look at the overall percentages at the end. So the question is, how do you plan to produce P60s this payroll year end? So do you plan to print them directly onto plain A4? Will you be emailing your P60s? Uses the same settings as email payslips, so same passwords, email addresses, and email provider. Or will you be uploading them as online P60s either to Sage HR, or if you're an accountant or bookkeeper, you'll be uploading to Online Bureau. So we'll leave that open a few more seconds just to give you the chance to vote. And always interesting to see the results on this one. So I will also share the overall percentages. Okay, so we've just had about 80% of the vote in. We're going to close that down now. And here are your results. So most popular method this morning is uploading online P60s to the online portal with 56% of the vote. In second place today, we have printed P60s with 44% of the vote. And in third place, we have email P60s with 21%. Now you can mix and match, so you can do some with one method, some with another. And we cover all of these options in part 2, which we're running on various dates between now and mid-April, with the next session taking place this afternoon. So thanks for joining in there, if you got the chance. We are nearly at the end of the presentation, but what I want to quickly do is run you through some of the further support that's available. And then if we have time, we'll have a look at some of the questions. So plenty of support available to you following the webinar today. So other webinars include year-end part 2, which we have mentioned a couple of times, taking place on various dates between now and the 18th of April. In this session, we take you through the full end-to-end payroll year-end process, including producing the P60s and doing your final submission of the year. And we also take you through what's new for 2024 to 25, both in terms of legislation and also some new software features. So get yourself signed up. The next session's this afternoon, but plenty of other dates and times available. Looking a bit further forward into April, we are giving you the opportunity to earn a digital badge by taking part in our Payroll Spring Clean webinar series. So we've got 5 webinars taking place in the second half of April. And if you attend at least 3 of these live sessions, you will earn yourself a badge. So the sessions are Spring Clean Your Payroll, Minimum Wage Check, Online Pay Slips, Report Favorites and Selections, and the IR Secure Mailbox. So you can sign up for those sessions now from our webinar guide. So just follow the links on the slide. Other useful resources include our online help centre, which you can access at sage.co.uk/help, or to get directly to the Payroll Year End Hub, you can go to sage.co.uk/PYE. You'll also find the same content if you click any of the help icons within Sage 50 Payroll. And if you need to get in touch with our support team, you can find all of their contact details on our help centre. And finally, we have Sage University at sageu.com, completely free for you to use. So sign up and create your profile, and then you can get your way to the Sage 50 Payroll training and certifications, where you'll find e-learning courses, online certification, and bite-sized learning, including the latest content on payroll year end. So do check that out at sageu.com. So we do have some time remaining. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick out some questions that have been sent in. So I'm going to put some questions to Alice around preparing for year end. And then if we have time, we may have some questions also on installing the update. So welcome back, Alice. I've got a few questions for you here. So I'll dive straight into the first one. So the question is, I have a number of staff on hold. Should I take them off hold to process the payroll year end?
So only take the employees off hold if they're returning to work. So if they're receiving any more pay, that's when you would take them off hold. If they aren't, you're more than okay to leave them on hold as you process payroll year end. And as I kind of touched on before, if they have been paid in the current tax year, they will still get a P60 and they will be still included in that payroll year end process.
Great, nice and simple then. Just keep them on hold until they next need to be paid. Your next one is on leavers. So how do I handle a leaver who left in March but is getting paid in April in the new tax year for their March hours?
Yeah, so this is common around payroll year end, especially if you pay your employees in arrears, because HMRC require the P45 to show the date that the employee left, with those year-to-date values as well for that tax year that the leave date falls in. So in this scenario, that would be the 23-24 tax year. So what you'd need to do is process the employee's final pay period in the 24-25 tax year, so in this case April, and then set your process date back to the 23-24 tax year to process them as a leaver and print their P45, so that way it shows correctly. You'd then set your process date back to the new tax year, so back to where you were up to submit your full payment submission as well. So I know that sounds like a lot of steps, but there is actually a really helpful article on this which I'd like to show you. So if I just steal the screen back for a second, I'll show you where you can find that. Just bear with me. Okay, we'll go back to the help centre. So this is just sage.co.uk/help. I'll click on Sage 50 Payroll, and I'm just going to type in leaver different tax year. And there's an article that describes this exact scenario. As I said, it is common around payroll year end. So if this does apply to you, this is the article that you're looking for. So it's leaver's last pay date and leave date are in different tax years. And the steps that I was kind of talking through there, you can find all of these on here. So if you follow these steps 1 to 9, you can't go wrong with that. So that's how you would do that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alice. Really useful article, that one. One more for you as you've got the screen. We have someone who likes to use the process maps. Can you remind us how we switch these back on again, please?
Yeah, of course. Let me bring payroll back up. So yeah, that used to be in the top right, the change view option. So if you did used to use or still like to use the process map, to turn that back on now, you're going to instead go to the view menu and go to, let me just change this back to payroll first actually. So go to the view menu, go to change view and process map, and that's going to turn it on for you. And of course you can still resize that as normal. And then to turn it off, just go to view again, change view and employee list, and that'll just flick it off. A kind of quicker way to do it as well, if you do want a little top tip from us, is go to the payroll year end section, because that is a process map section, so that'll turn it on. And a quick way to turn it off is just go to the employee section, because that doesn't have a process map. That'll turn it off. So a couple of ways to do it there, but yeah, still absolutely possible to use the process map.
Fantastic, and we love a shortcut, so good tip on switching between payroll year end and employee. Okay, so that's all the questions I had for you, Alice.
Yeah, I picked out a few as well for you, Duncan, if that's okay. So I've got 3 for you as well. The first one is about installations. So we've got, is there going to be another update to install following the latest budget announcement? Because I know you touched on that before.
There's no full update planned. So version 30 is the version you need to install. That's what we released back on the 4th of March. The legislation change will be deployed, or is being deployed, via the legislation update service. So we've got a really great article on how to do that. Tools check for legislation updates, essentially, but it's what we showed you earlier. So there's no plans for another full update. You won't need to install anything. You'll just need to apply the legislation update.
Great, thank you for that. And the next question is, I'm halfway through processing March's wages. Can I install the update now, and will it retain the payments that I've already entered?
So yes, you can install the update now. In fact, you probably will have to install the update now. It is now a mandatory update. But the good news is everything that you'd entered and saved into enter payments will be retained. I mean, ideally, you'd have taken a backup before you install. We know that's not always possible, but the information in the current data that you've entered, payment hours and rates, etc., will still be there once the data is upgraded to version 30. So no need to worry about losing that.
Fabulous, thank you. And then last one I picked out for you, Duncan, is I've already completed the legislation update this morning and it was successful, but when I check for legislation updates again, it still pops up to say that there's another update available. Why would this happen?
A great question. That's actually normal behaviour. That is how the legislation updates work. In fact, if I just grab the screen off you, I will show you this. So earlier in the demo, I did update my legislation. So I have to go into company and legislation and then to NI. You can see that the employee rate has been updated to the 8% here. However, the legislation service doesn't know that that legislation has been updated. There's nothing to sort of feedback that that's happened. So if I go to tools and check for legislation updates, it will still find it again, and it will prompt you to apply the changes again. Now, it does no harm whatsoever applying the change more than once, and you can see which of the different companies have been updated. So I do have a company I still need to log into to update the legislation, but for those that were previously updated, it'll still find that update. If you want to stop it popping up when you enter the payments, just go into company and then legislation, and you can then clear this box. As long as you're sure that you've already done it, you can clear that box and you'll stop being prompted to check when you go into enter payments. But that's why it's doing it. It is normal behaviour, so nothing to be concerned about there.
Thanks, Duncan. And yeah, I mean, if you are in doubt, just check the legislation tables as Duncan was shown before as well, just to see that 8% in there. But yeah, that's all 3 questions I picked out for you. Thanks very much.
Great. So we are nearly at the end of the webinar. We've got another 5 minutes or so. So we'll just make sure that we've answered all of the questions there in the chat. Final reminder, if you'd like a copy of the handouts, you can download them by clicking on the handout icon. And if you do have any final questions you'd like to ask the team, get them submitted now, as we will be sending out the final answers over the next few minutes. When you leave the webinar, you will be prompted to complete a survey. So once you exit out, a survey will appear on screen. Myself and Alice would really appreciate you spending a moment just to let us know what you thought of the webinar today, as we do read all of your comments and it helps us to keep these webinars relevant and improve them moving forward. And as well as that, we will send you a follow-up email later on today, which will include a link to the recording of today's session. So if you want to review anything that you missed, if we went a bit too fast for you, you can always go back to that recording and feel free to share that with any colleagues that couldn't make it today. But for now, we're both going to go and help out behind the scenes with the questions. So we'll be on mute for a little while, but we'll come back when we're ready to wrap up and close the webinar down. So we'll speak to you shortly.
Hello again, everyone. Thank you for all of your questions. I think we're just up to the last one now, so we've answered the rest of them. And do remember, if you want to save any of those questions or answers, just to copy and paste these into like a Word document or something. But that's it for now. We are going to end the webinar shortly, so we hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and hopefully we'll see you on another webinar soon. But on behalf of me and Duncan and our question answerers in the background as well, goodbye.